So as mentioned, I want to get started adding some data. And we're going to use Vuex for managing that data because it will not just be static data, which never changes, but obviously we'll be able to add coaches. After all, we will be able to register as one, and we'll also be able to send requests and so on. And that's why we already installed Vuex. Hence, I'll add a store folder next to my pages and components folders. And in that store folder, I'll add an index.js file where we set up the store in general. But I also want to work with modules here because we have two main features, coaches and requests. And I'll make each feature and the state and actions that belong to this feature a module. Hence, I'll add a modules folder in there. And now it's up to you how you want to split that code. One file for the entire module or multiple files per module. And really just to show you different approaches, I'll go with multiple files per module. So I'll add another subfolder here, coaches, and a second subfolder next to coaches, which is requests. And now we're going to start with some coach data. So here I'll add an index.js file inside of coaches. This is the file where we will merge all the coach-related mutations, actions, getters, and so on together. And then we'll have a mutations.js file, a actions.js file, a getters.js file, and we then split our logic across those files. This may be overkill. This is not something you have to do. But again, my idea with this course is that I also show you different ways of doing something. So therefore now here in index.js, inside of the coaches module, I'll export an object which will hold all the coach related state and so on. And therefore here we'll have some state, but we'll also have mutations, which I import from the mutations file. So import mutations from /mutations.js and assign mutations to mutations here. And since key name is similar to value name here, we can use this JavaScript shorthand I showed you a couple of times already, where we merge this like that, simply to write less code. And I'll do the same now with actions, which I import from actions.js, and import getters from /getters.js like this, and also add those to this module object. So then we have actions and getters in there as well. And now we export this module to merge it into our main store, which we have yet to create. So in the index.js file in the store folder, so this file here, I'll now import create store from Vuex, and then simply create a store by calling create store. And I'll export this store so that we can later use it in main.js. Now this store takes a config object as you learned. And here we can add the modules option to then import the coaches module from /modules/coaches/index.js in there. Because it's this nested index.js file where we set up this entire module and combine the mutations, actions, getters, and state of that module. Hence, it's that file where we combine it all, which we import. And then modules takes an object, and I'll give this a key, coaches, and point at my coaches module here. And that key will be important because I want to use namespacing. So in the index.js file in the coaches folder, here I'll add namespaced true to use this namespacing feature I taught you in the Vuex section. Now all those files we're importing from, mutations, actions, getters, they're all empty. So here we should also export objects. They can be empty right now because we don't have any mutations or actions or getters yet. But you should export at least an empty object in every file so that the imports here work and we at least have empty objects in our module here. Okay, so that is the first step. Now in the state here in index.js, in the coaches module, I want to return my state object And in here, the state should be that we of course have a list of coaches. And we're going to start with some dummy data here. Now you find that dummy data attached in the coaches.js file, which you can open with a text editor. And in there, you'll just find an array full of coaches, which will be my value for this coaches key in our coaches state. And here I prepared 2 dummy coaches for you with some dummy IDs and data so that we have something on the screen right from the start. Now that we have a state, I of course also want a getter to get that state, because as I mentioned in the Vuex module, whilst you can directly access the state from inside your components, it is recommended that you always use getters instead. And we are using getters here. So in the getters.js file for the coaches, I want to add a getter, and that will be the coaches getter, let's say, where we receive the state, we always do in getters, and where we then return state coaches. So nothing too fancy, no transformation or anything like that, but at least a getter in place now. I will also add a second getter already though, and that's the has coaches getter. Because later in this coaches list component, I only want to render this list if we have coaches. If we have no coaches at all, which will be the case once we switch to real data away from the dummy data, and we haven't added any coaches yet, if we don't have any coaches at all, I don't want to show that list because it would be an empty list anyways. So then instead I want to show a message like no coaches found. So therefore I'll add a helper getter where I simply check whether we have coaches or not, and where I then return true or false. So I want to return the result of checking if state coaches is truthy and state coaches length is greater than 0. This returns true if we have coaches, at least one coach, and it returns false otherwise. And now with the getters in place, the state in place, we can go back to main.js and import our store here to make sure we use it in this app. So import from the store folder index.js file and then app use our store. Now that Vuex store is part of this Vue app. And with this, I'm getting an error. State is not defined. I assume in my getters here, yes, in has coaches, I'm using state. Of course, I should also accept this argument therefore. But now with this, we're all set regarding that. And we can now go to coaches list and pull in our dummy data, our coaches. So for that, we should add a script here and reach out to our coaches getter. And we do this with a computed property. So we add the computed option here. And there I will now add a computed property, which I name filtered coaches. We are not filtering right now, but we soon will be once we also added this filter functionality. So I will already name the computed property as such. But for the moment here, I just want to return this store, $store, getters, and then get the coaches from this coaches getter. Now, how do we get access to that coaches getter? It's not getters.coaches because, keep in mind, this module is namespaced. So therefore, we have to reach this getter that belongs to this module through its namespace. And the namespace name is defined in index.js here, this key, which we set up here for this module. So we get access to our coaches here through getters and then square brackets, coaches/coaches. The first coaches here is the namespace name. The second coaches after the slash is the getter name. This now gives us our coaches here under filtered coaches, and now we can utilize them to output a real list of coaches. So here we can now render list items, and with v4 we can go through the coaches in filtered coaches, bind the key to coach.id because every coach stored in our store here has an ID. And then, of course, output whatever we want to output. For the second, just to see whether this works, I'll just interpolate coach.firstname here. We will, of course, output this in a different way very soon. If we now go to all coaches and reload, we should see 2 coach names here. And that proves that Vuex is wired up correctly and that we're able to access our coach data. And that, of course, is a great first step. Now we can also use that other getter we set up, hasCoaches, to make sure we only render this list if we have coaches. So here on this unordered list, I'll add a if check and check if we have coaches. And I'll add a h3 tag below that, let's say, with velse on it, which is the fallback where I say no coaches found, in case we, well, guess what, have no coaches. Now adding this here, however, now implies that we need to have a hasCoaches data property or computed property in this component, which we don't have yet. So here in the computed of this component, I'll add hasCoaches, because just having a getter of that name in Vuex, of course, doesn't do much. It's not available as a computed property in every component then. That's not how this works. So we have to add a separate computed property here in coaches list. And now here we can return this store getters and then again access coaches, which is the namespace, / hasCoaches, which is the getter name. Now with that, let's test this and temporarily remove the coaches here from our coaches array in the module. And we should see no coaches found now. And if I bring back those coaches here in the module and save this, we see the coach data again. So now that's working. Now that dummy data is wired up. And with that, we can go back to working on our components and also improving the styling here.